Progressive Democratic Party has expressed disappointment that the Commission on Parliamentary Reform should have included recommendations on making the Parliament more inclusive and representative. While applauding the Commission's work, it believes there are great missed opportunities. Christine Vasquez put it to PDP leader Nick Cruz that it was not surprising that his party, as a third party, welcomed backbenchers as it could open doors into Parliament for it.
Cynical people would say that. But look, in the last election, on the basis of the vote, we would have got nobody into Parliament as a backbencher. But I still think that backbenchers should have been there. But it's not about whether the PDP can access Parliament through backbench development. It is because there are checks and balances that are normal in every Parliament, in the United Kingdom or in any Parliament, even in smaller jurisdictions like Jersey, like Guernsey, and it is absolutely normal. And those checks and balances are important to keep the executive, the government, in check. And at the moment, what the Commission is suggesting doesn't work. On the one hand, they've suggested more select committees, and on the other hand, they've said we can't increase the size of Parliament, or that we shouldn't. Inevitably, you cannot have a select committee checking on the business of the government if you don't have more MPs. It's impossible, because you end up people checking on themselves. So it's inconsistent, the report, and I think it's an opportunity that has been missed by them. I hope at Parliament stage, those who regard the report as a recommendation only, which should be the entire Parliament, will think again about it.
You've mentioned small jurisdictions like Jersey and Guernsey, but Gibraltar also a tight-knit community. Do you think there's scope for independent thinking?
I think there's people who have expressed views, not just myself, but other people expressed views, the likes of Mr. Robert Vasquez and others, that if Parliament accommodated free thinkers that may have a political alignment to one party or another, but had the freedom, financial freedom and other freedoms to express views, inevitably you'd endear more debate and you'd act more of a check on a government of the day that has a small majority. So I think it's very likely, it's very credible, and I think it's an opportunity that other jurisdictions have taken. Jersey, Guernsey, they've all grown in the size of the Parliament, but we haven't grown since 1969. We had 17 members then, we have 17 members today.
Well, a report on parliamentary and electoral reform, but I believe you're not very happy with the fact that there aren't any changes to the voting system.
Yeah, our view was that we should have a system that makes sure we have strong government. So part of the seat should be elected by the current system, but part should be by proportional representation, and that would encourage a wider view of the community, not ones that are necessarily tied to one party or another. And I think that's another missed opportunity. Again, I hope that Parliament considers it and perhaps reflects on that particular position.
You mentioned cynics, but could people perhaps not want more people in Parliament, disenchanted with the whole system?
Yes, and people think of the cost, but we've explained that you don't have to have an increase in costs. Backbench MPs, people who are not in the executive, can earn considerably less than the £25,000 they earn today to be involved in politics. And I think people have expressed their view repeatedly. So it doesn't have to cost more. So that's the first issue that most people are concerned with. Secondly, if you allow for a system that encourages constructive debate, people will be less cynical. At the moment, you have this tribal system and you put people off politics. So I would hope that the system can be changed and that people can have a little bit of faith in how we develop, and that it should reflect not historical positions, but a modern democracy, which is where, compared to other jurisdictions, we're way behind.
The report has also recommended the inclusion of UK members in overseeing bodies. That's another thing the PDP is unhappy with.
Well, yes, because what the report has said is that in certain authorities that it seeks to establish regards to pay of the MPs, members' interest, not only should it have an authority based out of some suitably qualified Gibraltar members, but UK members. In other words, that we need to have an Englishman, for example, appointed because we're not able to check on ourselves. That, to us, strikes us of the worst kind of colonialism possible. We have a Gibraltarian Chief Justice, a Gibraltarian Commissioner of the Police. It really should be clear that we are evidently mature enough to make a check on ourselves, whether it is pay, whether it is our interest. And I think it's a retrograde step. It is colonialism. And I think it's disturbing that we should even reach those conclusions. I certainly hope that Parliament will reflect on that and disregard that.
Well, the PDP must have made its own contribution, its own recommendations. Have any been taken on board?
Some of the recommendations we just supported because it was a recommendation paper that was put to us in spring. We supported them, the ones I mentioned before, about more parliaments and so on. A large amount, which regards to a more fuller, more democratic, more representative House, have been ignored. I wouldn't say that the substantive recommendations that we made, and I think importantly that not just us, but at the last election, 51% of the electorate had manifestos in the form of the GSD manifesto and the PDP manifestos that made recommendations with regards backbench MPs. Those have been totally ignored. Now, our concern before the election, you will recall, was that this really was not something that was going to be materialised because the GSLP at the time were not particularly interested in developing the idea of checks and balances as they were likely to come into power. It looked quite possible. And I feel that the Commission has, to some extent, supported that position. I'm not suggesting in any way, shape or form that they have been in any way encouraged by the government, but their conclusions inevitably reflect that lack of establishing what I consider are important checks and balances.